Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Thursday, December 7th, 2023. The House Intelligence Committee passes a reauthorization of the FISA Section 702 warrantless foreign surveillance program unanimously. After adding reforms the members say will prevent the FBI from targeting U.S. citizens. Final version of the annual National Defense Authorization Act, or NDAA, has been released, with debates starting in the Senate. We'll talk about what's in the bill and what was left out with E&E News reporter Andres Picon. The president's $60 billion aid request for Ukraine still on hold over disagreements about what U.S. border security language should be added. We'll hear from Senate Democratic and Republican leaders and the White House about what could happen next. White House also reacting to the United Nations Security Council's expected debate on Friday on a resolution calling for a ceasefire in the war between Israel and Hamas. Plus, the U.S. House censures Congressman Bowman, Democrat from New York, after he pulled a fire alarm in a House office building when there was no emergency and while the House was voting to prevent the government shutdown. The House passes a bill to block the president's latest student loan relief plan, and it's the national menorah lighting outside the White House on this first night of Hanukkah. The House Intelligence Committee unanimously passed a reauthorization of the controversial surveillance program known as Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, or FISA, that allows the U.S. government to spy on non-Americans outside the United States. But as a Brennan Center paper explains, intelligence agencies have used legal loopholes to turn Section 702 into a go-to domestic spying authority, using it to conduct hundreds of thousands of warrantless backdoor searches for Americans' private communications every year. The Section 702 authorization expires at the end of 2023, end of this month. Here's Congressman Jim Himes of Connecticut, ranking Democrat on the Intelligence Committee, talking about some of the reforms included in the bill that passed today.
To highlight a few provisions among the many that are in this bill, we would institute a flat prohibition on queries conducted by the FBI to uncover, quote, evidence of a crime. This is important for two reasons. First, it removes any doubt that Section 702 is a foreign intelligence authority, not a law enforcement tool. That is what Congress intended when it was first enacted, and this makes that distinction crystal clear. Second, it will help remove confusion on the part of FBI agents about what constitutes a permissible query and drive improvements in compliance. This bill would also reduce by 90% the number of individuals at the FBI who can approve a U.S. person query, meaning that only 550 supervisors and attorneys at the agency could approve a query of a U.S. person against the 702 database. As with many other changes, this is intended to reduce compliance failures and to ensure that every time the FBI queries the FISA 702 data, it does so for a permissible and lawful purpose. This bill would, for the first time, put in law a prohibition against queries of Section 702 data whose purpose is either to suppress free expression or to disadvantage a person on the basis of religion, ethnicity, race, gender, or any other arbitrary characteristic. And finally, this bill includes important reforms to the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court itself, most notably by requiring that the FISC appoint an amicus each time the government seeks to renew its annual certification under Section 702. This will make sure that the FISC process will be adversarial and the arguments made by the government will receive strictest scrutiny.
Congressman Jim Himes, ranking Democrat on the Intelligence Committee, before the committee passed its Section 702 overseas warrantless surveillance reauthorization today by voice vote. The Intelligence Committee Chair, Michael Turner, Republican from Ohio, also spoke in favor of his committee's bill and its reforms, and he criticized the House Judiciary Committee's approval Wednesday of a competing Section 702 reauthorization that would add a warrant requirement with some emergency exceptions. That committee's vote was 35-2. Here's Congressman Turner.
Yesterday, the Judiciary Committee passed a bill purporting to be FISA reauthorization and reform. Our bill is targeted to FBI abuses, and I think I would have thought that their bill would have also. However, their bill spends more time expanding the constitutional rights of foreigners who travel in and out of the United States. It creates civil liability for telecommunications companies that work with our intelligence community voluntarily. And curiously, it provides immunity from prosecution for some horrific crimes if they're discovered in 702 foreign intelligence collection. Under their bill, 702 information would not be admissible in criminal prosecutions for horrific crimes such as child pornography, human trafficking, murder, and even money laundering. These are provisions of their bill that they're going to have to explain. Our bill is targeted toward FBI abuses, protecting the American citizens, and ensuring that we can address the national security threats to our nation.
House Intelligence Committee Chair Michael Turner, Republican from Ohio, at today's markup. A story from TheHill.com. Speaker Mike Johnson is taking heat from the hard-right conservative wing of his conference over the addition of a short-term extension of the nation's warrantless surveillance powers in the Defense Authorization Bill. The lawmakers have lobbied against any short-term extension of Section 702, arguing its impact on civil liberties should only be considered through standalone legislation. Johnson has appeared to waffle on the matter, as he initially indicated that Section 702 would not be included in the National Defense Authorization Act, or NDAA. That flipped Wednesday afternoon when a 4-month extension was included in the NDAA, annoying those who want to see serious reforms to the Surveillance Act. The full text of the final version of the National Defense Authorization Act, as negotiated by the House and Senate, has been released. An initial vote in the Senate today to start debate passed 82-15. For more about what's in this year's NDAA, we're joined on the phone by Andres Picon, E&E News Update, covering Congress and energy policy. Thanks for being with us. What energy and climate and related provisions have you been tracking that made it into the final bill and left out?
Yeah, there's a bunch of energy and climate provisions all throughout the bill. A lot of the biggest ones that we've been following have been around nuclear energy. Nuclear energy has been a really big bipartisan issue, especially as of late. And lawmakers in both chambers and on both sides of the aisle have really been trying to find ways to secure domestic fuel sources and really advance innovation with advanced reactors. The ADVANCE Act came out of the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee. That was a really, really big one that didn't end up making it into the bill. A lot of lawmakers had hoped that that would kind of spur innovation and licensing for advanced reactors. But unfortunately, due to some disputes and procedural concerns with the House, that didn't end up making it in. One surprise that did make it in was the Nuclear Fuel Security Act. That one is it's a bipartisan bill in the Senate, and it would establish a nuclear fuel security program and fund domestic uranium production, which has a lot of national security and energy benefits. Some other things that we've been looking at are around climate. The House version of the NDAA, when that passed in July, included an amendment from Representative Chip Roy that would have defunded all of President Biden's executive orders on climate change. That was a big concern for a lot of Democrats in both chambers, and it didn't end up making it into the final bill. We've been also monitoring some provisions around minerals and natural resources. Minerals are, increasingly important for use in batteries, electric vehicles, energy storage, and there are a lot of provisions in the final NDAA that we're seeing that would help the Defense Department, achieve what they call mineral independence, help foster stronger supply chains for minerals here domestically, and reduce reliance on countries like China for important minerals for batteries and energy storage.
When we talk about what made it in and what didn't make it in, who were the decision makers in this case?
Yeah, so the Senate and House Armed Services Committee went into conference negotiations last week and basically negotiated, what was in, what was out, what kinds of provisions were palatable to kind of members of both parties and that they felt could secure bipartisan support to get this final bill passed. Negotiations have been ongoing for weeks, perhaps months, kind of behind the scenes among leaders of the House and Senate Armed Services Committees and their staff. But it really officially began in earnest last week, and it concluded just last night. And there were some final, last-minute kind of holdups with regard to some provisions around surveillance and abortion and other kind of, controversial issues, and they hammered those out last night at the last minute.
We're talking with Andres Picon from E&E News. As it's now coming up in the Senate first, Can it be amended, and are there some people who would like to try to change it again?
At this point, I don't think it'll go through any more amendment processes. The Senate is scheduled to take a vote early next week to try to get the final bill passed. It'll be the 63rd consecutive year that the NDAA passes. However, there are some for example, Senator Josh Hawley has proposed to object to the bill. So it's unclear at this point what the timeline might look like. He had an amendment to the Senate version of the NDAA around nuclear contamination and compensation for victims of nuclear testing contamination. That did not make it into the final version, and he has pledged to oppose the bill for that reason. We'll see where that goes at this point.
And what are you hearing about the prospect for House passage?
Yeah, after the Senate eventually passes it, it'll go to the House. I think lawmakers really are interested in passing this. This has always been a bipartisan issue. Obviously, the House is narrowly divided, and the Republican conference itself is divided on many issues. But I think there's good momentum and a good amount of desire among lawmakers on both sides of the aisle to get this passed.
And I guess I should ask, is the White House supporting this final version?
I'm actually not sure. I'm not sure they put out an official statement, but the White House is always supportive of defense policy, and this is a national security imperative for Congress and the White House to pass. So they'll be looking to get this onto President Biden's desk as soon as possible.
Andres Picon with E&E News Update covers Congress and energy policy. You can find his stories at enenews.net and on X, formerly Twitter, at ANDPICON. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
And as he referenced, this from military.com, the Defense Department policy of covering travel and leave for service members seeking abortions will remain intact under the compromised version of the annual must-pass defense policy bill. Existing health care for transgender troops and dependents was also left untouched by the negotiated NDAA that members of the House and the Senate unveiled after months of hearings and negotiations. Overall spending or authorization in that bill is $886 billion. It is separate from the appropriations bills that fund the government, including the Pentagon. Authorized in this bill is a pay raise for the troops, 5.2%, and money to buy ships and aircraft and other policies for the Pentagon. House Republicans did get some of the COVID-19 provisions they wanted. The bill does order the department to consider reinstating service members who were discharged for not getting vaccinated if they request reinstatement. This is Washington Today. From Associated Press, the military announced late Wednesday it was grounding all of its Osprey V-22 helicopters 1 week after 8 Air Force Special Operations Command service members died in a crash off the coast of Japan. The Air Force, Navy, and Marine Corps took the extraordinary step of grounding hundreds of aircraft after a preliminary investigation of last week's crash indicated that a materiel failure, that something went wrong with the aircraft and not a mistake by the crew, led to the deaths. That was from Associated Press. Here is the Pentagon Deputy Press Secretary Sabrina Singh getting a question about it.
Is the Secretary concerned about a loss of this many aircraft at once with so many things going on?
The Secretary fully supports the services and they're out of the abundance of caution to stand these aircraft down. This is something that we've done before. Whenever there is a mishap that a service feels needs either more investigation or just out of an abundance of caution, there have been stand downs of fleets before of other platforms. And so the Secretary, of course, supports the service's decision to do that. And again, I'd refer you to the services regarding their details on the pause of operations.
Sabrina Singh is the Deputy Pentagon Press Secretary. Story from Reuters. U.S. Senate leaders vowed on Thursday to keep trying to reach an agreement to provide billions of dollars in new security aid to Ukraine, but faced uncertainty about doing so quickly after Republicans blocked a sweeping foreign security assistance bill. Senate Republicans voted unanimously on Wednesday to block the emergency spending bill to provide $110.5 billion in funds for Ukraine, Israel, and other security needs to press their demands for more control of immigration via the U.S. border with Mexico. That's how Reuters put it. Here's the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, on the Senate floor this morning about what happens now.
We are left with only two paths forward to break the logjam. Either Republicans can take us up on an amendment offer, or we can restart negotiations. Now, if we are to negotiate, it has to be in good faith. Republicans need to show they are serious about reaching a compromise, not just throwing on the floor, basically, Donald Trump's border policies. Again, Republicans need to be serious and stop the game playing. They've been game playing when they pushed Donald Trump's radical border policies, when they said border is the ransom they want, and when they moved the goalposts during negotiations. We need to stop playing around and get serious about the immense challenge in front of us. Both sides must accept that we have to compromise on things important to each side if we have any hope of passing the supplemental. Let me state, we Democrats very much want an agreement. We are willing to make compromises and concessions to meet our Republican colleagues as long as they are willing to do the same. Let me conclude again with how important this is and with the warning that the Republican leader issued in recent months, that if we aren't willing to invest in the defense of democracy right now, we're going to be forced to pay a much higher price down the line. Better to defend democracy with American resources today instead of American lives tomorrow. That is the danger of allowing brutes like Vladimir Putin to win the day.
The Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer on the Senate floor. Later, Senate Republicans on the Judiciary Committee held a news conference to talk about how they see this impasse being overcome. Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican from South Carolina, is the committee's ranking member.
We had an effort yesterday by Senator Schumer to pass aid to Ukraine, Taiwan, and Israel, which I support, and their proposal on securing a broken border was awful. What's next? Here's what's next. The Commander-in-Chief, Joe Biden, needs to wake up and do something about a broken border. It's his job, above all others, to secure the nation. Here's what we learned this week in Judiciary. The director of the FBI said, when asked about blinking lights threats, I see blinking lights everywhere I turn. Since October the 7th, now people need to understand that what happened to Israel affects you too. Now we've all chosen, Republicans and Democrats, to support Israel because we need to. Hamas would kill all of us if they could. We need to be behind our friends in Israel. What does that mean for us? The threat level has gone to a whole other level since October the 7th. Post-October the 7th, a verbal rogues gallery of terrorist organizations are calling for attacks against us. So what does that mean? The people who want to destroy Israel are trying to pay us back for helping Israel. President Biden, you don't need to negotiate with any of us. You have the ability as president to stop this problem now if you choose to use the law that is available to you. Why is the border so broken? Because the policy choices of President Biden are not working. Next. I've never seen a time when all the threats, or so many of the threats, are all elevated at exactly the same time. Next. This was December the 6th. Fighting age males lined up as far as you can see. Bottom line is we're urging the president to get involved and fix this problem. Senator Murphy's a fine fellow, but it's never going to happen as long as Senator Schumer is in charge of these negotiations. We're going to have to get the President of the United States involved. He owes it to the American people to fix a broken border. And when I say broken, what do I mean? I mean really broken. In the last 4 days, we've had 40,000 illegal crossings. 2 days ago was the highest on record. We're averaging, for the last 7 days, 9,400 people. We're on track to 3.6 million this year alone, 6 million up to date since he's been president. Larger than 21 states. The threat levels at an all-time high, the illegal crossings into our country at an all-time high, and my Democratic colleagues are saying, what do we get? to secure the border, you get a safer country. You're not going to get legalization of illegal immigrants in this deal. This is about securing our border so we can then help our allies.
Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican from South Carolina, ranking member on the Judiciary Committee, at a news conference today with other Senate Republicans on that committee. At the White House, the press secretary Karine Jean-Pierre asked about what happens now when it comes to Ukraine aid and border security.
H.R. 2 is what Speaker Johnson and the House Republicans want to move forward with, right? And let's not forget what's in H.R. 2, right? H.R. 2 forced the deportation of unoccupied children seeking refuge. It mandates detention of all families. That's the extreme. That's what we're seeing from H.R. 2. That's not moving forward in good faith. Okay.
So what would Republicans have to do to show that they are willing to operate in good faith on this subject in order for the White House to engage in negotiations?
So look, they should have a conversation with Democrats. Democrats have said that they want to compromise. Have that conversation, right? Just make that discussion, have that discussion, negotiate in good faith with our Democratic leaders in Congress. Have that conversation.
Well, there have been bipartisan negotiations taking place for weeks in the Senate. Are you saying that that's the proper venue for this discussion, not discussions between Senate Republicans and directly with the White House?
The negotiations has been happening and should be happening with Republicans and Democrats in Congress. That's what should be happening. And we want to continue for them to have those conversations. But they're not moving forward in good faith. They're just not. And, you know, when you have a speaker demanding to push forth H.R. 2, which is extreme, it is extreme. That is not moving in good faith. And so that's what we're seeing. And let's not forget, you know, House Republicans voted to cut 2,000 border agents. You know, they are blocking the president's efforts to secure the border and enforce the laws. Those are the things that they're doing. So where's the good faith? Where's the good faith there?
So when Senator Cornyn says he thinks this needs to be kicked up to another level, direct talks between Leader McConnell and the president or his aides here at the White House, you're saying that's not going to happen?
What we're saying that Republicans need to act in good faith and show that they're serious, and they're not, you know, because they're blocking, right? They're blocking the president's request for funding. That's what they're doing. So that's what we want to see. We introduce, and here's the thing, we introduce a comprehensive piece of legislation to deal with the immigration system, a broken system. We did that on day one. That was our effort, to have that conversation, to negotiate and be able to put forward a piece of legislation that could be voted on. The president put forth his ideas and how he wanted to move forward. It's been 3 years. What they continue to do is block. What they continue to do is take away law enforcement, right? That they keep voting against trying to make the system better. That's not acting in good faith.
White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre with reporters in the White House briefing room. Again, from the Reuters article, by mid-November, the U.S. Defense Department had used 97% of $62.3 billion in supplemental funding it had received for Ukraine, and the State Department had used all of the $4.7 billion in military assistance funding it had been allocated to help Kyiv as it battles Russian invaders. U.S. Budget Director Shalanda Young said this week. This from the Guardian newspaper in Great Britain. The Biden administration faces a showdown at the United Nations Security Council in the next 48 hours, at which it may feel impelled to use its veto to protect Israel by rejecting calls for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza. The United Arab Emirates, the only Arab country on the 15-strong Security Council, said it would table a resolution on Thursday for debate on Friday after the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres and most Islamic states call for the ceasefire. Guterres infuriated Israel on Thursday by taking the rare step of invoking Article 99 of the UN Charter to notify the Security Council that the crisis in Gaza represented a threat to world peace. It was the first time he had invoked the article since he became Secretary General in 2017. That was from The Guardian. A preview of sorts today at the White House press conference. Joining Karine Jean-Pierre was John Kirby, a spokesperson for the National Security Council.
The UN has described the humanitarian situation in Gaza as disastrous, and actually they said it's hell on earth. The Secretary General activated Article 99, which have not been activated since 1971.
1989, I think, was the last time.
I think it's 7. Well, okay, we can't disagree on this. We'll agree. We'll go back to the facts. But anyway, the bottom line is, does the international community, including the United States, has failed the civilians in Gaza, since the frustration went up at the UN to the level of the Secretary General to call for what happened in Gaza as a threat to the regional security?
Everything we're doing is trying to prevent this conflict from widening, deepening, escalating, and having a larger effect on the region. Many of the questions I've answered here today, I think, demonstrate all the things that the President is doing through his personal leadership engagement, including phone calls today with leaders in the region, to try to keep this conflict from escalating. Look, we certainly share the concerns that so many of others have concerned, including the Secretary General, about the humanitarian situation in Gaza. Name me one more nation, any other nation, that's doing as much as the United States to alleviate the pain and suffering of the people of Gaza. You can't. You just can't. The United States, through President Biden, is leading the effort to get trucks, food, water, medicine, and fuel into the people of Gaza. Wait. Name another nation that's doing as more than the United States to get hostages out or to get people, foreign nationals, out of Gaza. You can't do it. And name another nation that is doing more to urge our Israeli counterparts, to be as cautious and deliberate as they can be in the prosecution of their military operations. You can't. The United States is at the forefront of this. Now, every single casualty, Israeli or Palestinian, innocent life loss, every one of them is a tragedy, and we mourn with those families. We say it over and over and over again because we believe it, and it comes from the heart. But we also have to remember what Israel's up against. A terrorist group, that deliberately puts those civilians in harm's way and puts them in the crossfire of this fight. That's what the Israelis are fighting.
John Kirby is Strategic Communications Coordinator for the White House National Security Council, today at the White House briefing. From the New York Times, as Israel's offensive pushes Palestinian civilians into ever smaller pockets of land with scant supplies, the military said on Thursday that Hamas militants fired rockets from what it called humanitarian zones in southern Gaza, adding to concerns that nowhere in the enclave was fully safe for civilians. And from NBC News, Israel says its forces are in the heart of the southern Gaza Strip's main city, Khan Yunis, and encircling the home of a top Hamas leader who is thought to be hiding underground. A U.S. official told NBC News that Israel is exploring flooding the militant group's web of tunnels with seawater to disable them. In Washington, on Capitol Hill, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, Democrat from Michigan, joined a news conference calling for an immediate ceasefire in the war between Israel and Hamas.
Our movement for ceasefire is only growing stronger, and I'm grateful for each and every single of the voices here today, especially my doctors in the Michigan 12th Congressional District. I will continue to demand a ceasefire, the immediate delivery of enough humanitarian aid in Gaza. And I say this, enough. The release of all hostages and those arbitrarily detained by Israel. Every American to come home and demand that the Palestinian people live free from occupation. The path to peace must include addressing the root causes, y'all, of this conflict, of ending the blockade, the occupation, the apartheid. Can't ignore it anymore. The Palestinian people deserve to live with equal rights, freedom, and human dignity. The Israeli government has killed over 16,000 Palestinians in Gaza, including over 6,000 children. Over 1.7 million Palestinians have been displaced from their homes. Many of their children are asking, when are we going home? There is no home to go back to. And thousands are missing under the rubble. So I once again stand here to ask my colleagues, how many more lives will be enough for you all? How many more innocent civilians and children have to be killed? How many more lives will you accept as collateral damage? There is nothing humanitarian about giving Palestinians a few days of rest before they are bombed again. We are calling for an end of this violence, not a break in the violence. The temporary pauses are not enough. We need a permanent ceasefire now. We need an end to the genocide. President Biden, I say this over and over again because I hope you hear me. You must listen to the voices of the majority of Americans and the majority of Democrats who worked their butt off to get you elected. You have to represent all of us, Mr. President, not just some. Call for a ceasefire now.
Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, Democrat from Michigan, at a news conference today outside the U.S. Capitol building. Also there, other House Democrats, Cori Bush of Missouri and Ilhan Omar of Minnesota, and doctors. A sign on the lectern read, "Doctors for Ceasefire Now." Another New York Times story, an October 13th strike that killed a videographer for the Reuters news agency and injured 6 others in southern Lebanon was carried out by the Israeli military and appeared to be a deliberate attack, Human Rights Watch said on Thursday. U.S. Senator Rand Paul, Republican from Kentucky, posting on X, "Today I forced the Senate vote to reclaim congressional war powers and end the American military presence in Syria. Unfortunately, some senators chose to continue abdicating their constitutional authority to the executive branch." His resolution failed by a vote of 13 yeses and 84 noes. The yes votes came from 7 Democrats: Dick Durbin, Ed Markey, Jeff Merkley, Chris Murphy, Elizabeth Warren, Ron Wyden, and Peter Welch, plus 5 Republicans: Mike Braun, Mike Lee, Rand Paul, Tommy Tuberville, and J.D. Vance, and Independent Bernie Sanders. Today is National Pearl Harbor Remembrance Day, the 82nd anniversary of the Japanese military surprise attack on the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii in 1941, leading to the U.S. declaring war on Japan and entering World War II. On the House floor today, Congressman Glenn Thompson, Republican.
Mr. Speaker, I rise before you today to recognize an important day in American history. On December 7, 1941, our great nation was suddenly attacked by the Imperial Japanese Navy, leading to the death of 2,043 American service members and civilians. 82 years later, we remember these brave souls who lost their lives that day defending our very freedoms. On August 23, 1994, Congress created the National Pearl Harbor Remembrance Day to honor the lives lost each year. Now, on December 7, 2023, we once again recognize and remember every man and woman who laid down their life for the United States that day. We are forever indebted to their sacrifices. In the time of war, our great nation was able to preserve. Let this day be a reminder to us that our freedom should never be taken for granted. God bless those who lost their lives that day, and God bless America. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and yield back the balance of my time.
Congressman Glenn Thompson, Congresswoman Sylvia Garcia, Democrat from Texas, posting on X, "Today we will remember the heroes of Pearl Harbor on this solemn anniversary. Their courage and sacrifice will forever echo through history." Washington Today continues in a moment.
People often think C-SPAN is funded by the federal government. In fact, we're a nonprofit organization that receives no government funding. As news consumption changes, you can help ensure the future of C-SPAN's unfiltered coverage of national government and politics. We hope you will consider making a tax-deductible contribution that will support our daily editorial operations. To learn more, visit cspan.org/donate.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast wherever you find your podcasts or on the C-SPAN Now mobile app, which is free. The U.S. House voted today to censure Congressman Jamal Bowman, Democrat from New York, for pulling a fire alarm in a House office building in September when there was no emergency and while the House was in session and voting, and it did lead to an evacuation of that office building. The vote was 214 to 191, with 5 voting present. Congressman Bowman apologized at the time and has since pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor, agreed to pay a $1,000 fine, and serve 3 months probation, after which the charge will be deleted from his record. Debate on the resolution took place Wednesday night. The vote was today. The sponsor is Congresswoman Lisa McClain, Republican from Michigan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On September 30th, as the House of Representatives met to consider legislation to avoid a government shutdown, Representative Jamal Bowman of New York knowingly pulled a fire alarm to cause chaos and stop the House from doing its business. This is a felony, plain and simple. It's not difficult to understand. Capitol Police was forced to waste resources in investigating rather than doing their job to keep the Capitol safe. USCP determined Bowman broke the law, and he was indicted by the Attorney General of the District of Columbia. Realizing no number of excuses could get him out of this, Mr. Bowman pled guilty. As a former principal of the Cornerstone Academy for Social Action in New York City, Mr. Bowman should know the consequences of pulling a fire alarm to cause panic. In New York schools, the policy is clear. When a student commits a crime on campus, police are called and that student is either suspended or expelled. One would think Representative Bowman would be able to hold himself to the same standards as he held his students to. I don't think that's a lot to ask. The Republican majority held our own former member accountable after the House Ethics Committee found he engaged in criminal behavior. It would be hypocritical for the House Democrats to not join us in holding one of their own members accountable who actually pled guilty to breaking the law.
Congresswoman Lisa McClain, Republican from Michigan, on the House floor Wednesday night. Congressman Bowman spoke against the resolution.
Fighting for my district includes working to prevent a government shutdown. And just over 2 months ago, I was rushing to the Capitol to vote and prevent a Republican shutdown. When I tried to exit a door that I usually go through, it didn't open, and due to confusion and rush to go vote, I pulled the fire alarm. I immediately took responsibility and accountability for my actions and pled guilty. Immediately. The legal process on this matter has played out. In no way did I obstruct official proceedings. The vote took place, and Democrats were able to ensure we avoided a government shutdown. Unfortunately, Republicans are here trying to rehash an already litigated matter, a matter in which the Republican-controlled House Committee on Ethics decided not to proceed with any further investigation. This is an insult to the people I was elected to represent. Instead of passing meaningful legislation for the American people, some Republicans are using this censure to waste our time and money and to try and make you forget about all of the rights they want to destroy. They're trying to make you forget they want to take away your reproductive rights, your voting rights, your health care, your Social Security, and your Medicare.
Congressman Jamal Bowman, Democrat from New York, on the House floor Wednesday night. The vote on the resolution to censure him was today. Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, presided.
On this vote, the yeas are 214, the nays are 191. The resolution is, with 5 present, the resolution is adopted. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Will Representative Bowman present himself in the well? By its adoption of House Resolution 914, the House has resolved that the House of Representatives censures Jamal Bowman, representative from the 16th Congressional District of New York, that Representative Jamal Bowman forthwith present himself in the well of the House of Representatives for the pronouncement of censure, and that Representative Jamal Bowman be censured with the public reading of this resolution by the Speaker.
Speaker Mike Johnson presiding over the House. He did not go on to actually read the text of the resolution aloud. About that vote today, 214 to 191, 3 Democrats joined the Republicans in voting yes. Johanna Hayes of Connecticut, Chris Pappas of New Hampshire, and Marie Glusenkamp Perez of Washington State. And there were 5 members voting present. Republican Andy Harris of Maryland and Democrats Chrissy Houlihan of Pennsylvania, and 3 members of the Ethics Committee, Glenn Ivey of Maryland, Deborah Ross of North Carolina, and Susan Wild of Pennsylvania. Jamal Bowman is the 27th member ever to be censured by the U.S. House and the 3rd this year. The 2 others were Democrats as well, Adam Schiff and Rashida Tlaib. An article in Roll Call: the House passed a measure Thursday to block implementation of a new Biden administration student loan repayment option tied to income. The joint resolution under the Congressional Review Act would disapprove an Education Department rule that includes family size and income in calculating the amount borrowers must repay. The option would allow borrowers who have earnings of less than $15 per hour to pay $0. Congresswoman Virginia Foxx, Republican from North Carolina, chair of the Education and the Workforce Committee, started off the debate.
On June 30th of this year, mere hours after the Supreme Court decapitated the administration's previous student loan scheme. The Department of Education unveiled its so-called Savings on a Valuable Education, SAVE plan. Despite its deceptive name, that is, without question, the most expensive regulation in our nation's history. So how bad will the damage be? The Congressional Budget Office estimates this new IDR program will actually cost over $260 billion over the next 10 years, over $100 billion more than what the department was telling the American people. But wait, there's more. Outside experts estimate the cost to be as much as $559 billion. Clearly, this is not a repayment plan, and Democrats have not been shy about their intentions for reshaping post-secondary education. Indeed, Democrats couldn't get their socialist free college fantasy through Congress, so they're attempting to shove it down the throats of Americans through the loan program by executive fiat.
Congresswoman Virginia Foxx, Republican from North Carolina, chair of the Education and the Workforce Committee. Congressman Bobby Scott of Virginia is the committee's ranking Democrat.
Repealing the SAVE Act would be extremely disruptive for millions of Americans enrolled in the program. In fact, the department reported last month that 5.5 million borrowers have already enrolled in the program, including nearly 18,000 borrowers in my district and about 8,600 in the district represented by the gentlelady from North Carolina. They're already enjoying the improvements in the plan and the lower payments. Mr. Speaker, we're responsible for strengthening support for those seeking a college degree, not just because everyone should be forced to get one, but because those who want a college degree should have access to that opportunity. As President Johnson noted when he signed the Higher Education Act into law in 1965, he said that it meant that a high school senior anywhere in this great land of ours can apply to any college or university in any of the 50 states and not be turned away because the family is poor. Repealing the SAVE Act does nothing to make higher education more affordable or accessible, and for that reason, Mr. Speaker, I oppose the bill.
Congressman Bobby Scott, Democrat from Virginia, on the House floor. The House passed this resolution blocking the president's new income-driven student repayment plan for new and existing student borrowers by a vote of 205 to 185. The yes votes coming from Republicans and 2 Democrats, Jared Golden of Maine and Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez of Washington State. Also, this from a roll call article, the administration announced Wednesday that its efforts to provide relief to student borrowers had topped $4.8 billion. The Education Department said $2.6 billion in debt was forgiven for those working in public sector jobs and $2.2 billion in relief from efforts to make the income-driven repayment program work better. That was from roll call. On Wall Street today, the Dow up 62, NASDAQ up 193, S&P up 36. The National Menorah lighting on the ellipse south of the White House in Washington, D.C. is tonight, first night of Hanukkah. U.S. Navy Band and the group The Three Cantors performing. It's the 45th lighting of the menorah, sponsored by American Friends of Lubavitch, or Chabad. And the menorah is billed as the world's largest. Among the speakers, the second gentleman, Doug Emhoff, who is Jewish.
Now look, normally this is a time of celebration and joy. I want us to celebrate Hanukkah. And I know right now that might seem a little far-fetched to some of you. I know you're in pain. I'm in pain. I know a lot of us are feeling unmoored and afraid. We've not seen anything like this moment, and I know it's scary. Just look at the news just the past couple of days. What have we seen? We've seen the presidents of some of our most elite universities literally unable to denounce calling for the genocide of Jews as anti-Semitic That lack of moral clarity is simply unacceptable. We've seen a restaurant owner who's a friend of mine accused of genocide simply because he's Jewish. We've all seen college students afraid to go to class. We've seen people afraid to go to markets, afraid to go to synagogues, literally being attacked on our streets. Let me be clear. When Jews are targeted because of their beliefs or identity, and when Israel is singled out because of anti-Jewish hatred, that is anti-Semitism, and it must be condemned. And condemned unequivocally and without context.
Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff at the National Menorah lighting on the Ellipse just south of the White House on this first night of Hanukkah. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word. It's free, and get the stories making headlines in Washington emailed to you every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.